Thank you so much, Haley. U.S. President Donald Trump has issued several executive orders related to immigration, ramping up deportations and suspending refugee resettlement.
That's right. The debate around immigration in Michigan and across the country has intensified. But here to provide expert insights into the policy shifts that will affect immigrant communities in Michigan is Legal Director of Immigration Law and Justice in Michigan, Marcelo Betti. Now, for those that may not be aware of what's been going on the past 3 weeks here on the national stage, what has been happening in relation to immigration and some of these orders that Trump has put out?
Well, quite a bit has happened. I think from day one of this administration, there have been a lot of pretty sharp policy shifts. I think that the one that has caught the most media attention has been the attempt to remove birthright citizenship. But there were also other things that perhaps have not been as discussed, but that are just as serious.
And what are some of those? Because that it can be really hard, honestly, to stay up to date on all the changes. It seems like every single day we're getting a slew of changes. It's hard to know what each of these elements are. So could you let us know, what are some of the biggest things that have changed over the past 3 weeks?
Right. So one of the big things that has happened has been the removal of the sensitive locations policy. Basically, under the previous administrations, immigration enforcement was not going to be carried on. Arrests for immigration violations were not going to be carried out in places like schools or churches and other locations that the government considered sensitive. We can see why. Right. I don't know about you, but I think most of us would not want to see armed men walk into a kindergarten's classroom and yanking out one of their peers. So that's the kind of thing that has changed. But that's not to say that this is currently happening, but it can happen. It is now, it's been authorized by the federal government that these things could happen. So places like churches and schools are now having to scramble to prepare themselves for how to respond to this type of thing.
And we did have a few schools already kind of give some direction to their staff on how to handle this. Why do you think it's good for those type of organizations to have a plan in place ahead of time? Is that going to help them out in the long run?
I think the main reason is because we all need to kind of refresh our recollection of what our constitutional rights are, right? So if law enforcement comes to someone's house or comes to a school or a church, that doesn't mean that they can just barge in and start taking people for no reason, right? So I think that a lot of schools and churches and just about everybody else who is in a vulnerable position has to remember that law enforcement needs to have a judicial warrant in order to arrest someone. They have to have probable cause in order to stop someone. So those are the kinds of things that I think that schools and churches, they haven't always had to think about these things, especially churches. But now, they're having to train their staff, including their volunteer staff, that, if a bunch of armed people come in and they say they want to look around, you actually have the right to stop them and say, hey, do you have a warrant? Is there a reason why you're here?
Gotcha. Now, what other changes have been enacted through these executive orders, Marcelo?
Right. So another big change is the immigration officers now have the authority to stop and detain any person who they believe has committed an immigration violation. And if they determine that that person has been in the country for less than 2 years, they have the authority now to just place them in deportation and get them out of the country without the right to a judicial hearing. Again, this is a big change. Like we know that the Constitution usually gives us the right to at least see a judge and present our case to a judge if we're detained. But this is a right that is basically being taken away by this administration. And I don't know. Again, most people don't carry around with them proof that they have been in the country for 2 years. I don't carry around my last 2 years of tax returns or rental agreements.
That's, yeah.
So you can see how, some people,
This is
especially if there's a
slippery
language
slope.
barrier, even if they are a U.S. citizen, you can see how they might end up in a bad situation if they're not able to communicate their status, and they're not able to prove their status because they don't have those documents on them.
Oh,
What about
that is
people that are
scary.
here in this country that have been given protections, like they're not citizens, but do they need to be worried about these changes?
Unfortunately, yes. So another one of the big changes is that immigration officers have been given the authority to terminate individuals' humanitarian parole status, right? So, for example, our organization here has worked over the past 2 years with community partners like the Slavic Evangelical Church and Bethany Christian Services to support our large local Ukrainian community. Most people don't realize, but the Traverse City region has been a resettlement location for Ukrainians for the past 25 to 30 years. So when the war broke out, a lot of them who still had friends and family in Ukraine sponsored them to come here temporarily under these humanitarian parole programs. And I can say that out of our little office here in Traverse City, we've helped over 200 Ukrainian clients.
Wow.
So the problem now is that virtually all of them are in an extremely vulnerable situation because the administration now has given officers authority and discretion to terminate people's parole status, even though those are folks who fled a war in Ukraine. The U.S. government authorized them to come here, but unfortunately, their rights are really on the edge here.
Any recourse for them, or
Yeah.
not really?
Well, the recourse is for us to keep doing everything that we can to protect their rights to the fullest extent. So some folks from Ukraine have perhaps other immigration statuses that they can apply for, such as temporary protected status. I think that's when each individual's case is going to be a little different, depending on their circumstances. So that's why it's important for them to seek competent legal counsel to see, hey, is there anything that we can do? Is there something that I haven't? Is there some paper that I haven't filed? Is there some recourse to protect myself and my family?
Now, speaking of, Marcelo, in our last 30 seconds, where could someone go for more information and to seek help if they need it?
Sure. Well, folks who need legal help and some general guidance can contact our office, Immigration Law and Justice Michigan, here in Traverse City. Our website is www.iljmi.org, and that would be a good place to start.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Marcelo Betti, really appreciate you coming on. This is a tricky topic right now in this country, so thank you so much for providing clarity. It's easy to get lost. It's easy to get lost. And
Agreed.
And we'll make sure
Thank you so much.
all the links our viewers need to connect and get more information, it's all going to be available on 9and10news.com after the show today. You have a good day, sir.